The day everything began was so ordinary that I couldn't have predicted what kind of storm was about to roll in. It was one of those afternoons where the neighborhood looked frozen in that quiet suburban calm, the kind of quiet that feels almost staged. The lawns were perfectly trimmed. Sprinklers ticked back and forth in carefully timed intervals. A delivery truck rumbled lazily down the street, and from my kitchen window the world seemed almost too still. I had no reason to think that pressing the garage door button would turn into the kind of disaster people whisper about for weeks afterward. At the time, I was thinking about nothing more than grabbing a few tools from my workbench. That's all. A simple errand into my own garage. I remember my hand brushing the wall switch, the small hum of the motor firing up, and the long metallic groan as the garage door started to climb. That sound is so ordinary it barely registers most days. But as the strip of sunlight widened and more of the driveway came into view, my life pivoted. At first, nothing seemed unusual. A couple of kids were pedaling their bikes down the block, one of them wobbling dangerously as he tried to ride without hands. A man I vaguely recognized was walking a golden retriever. The smell of barbecue drifted faintly from somewhere nearby. I thought it was just another regular day. Then I saw her. Karen. Anyone who lives in a neighborhood with an HOA has a Karen. The self-appointed watchdog, the kind of person who believes the bylaws give her divine authority. The neighbor who doesn't just notice things, but takes them as personal offenses. In our neighborhood, Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She was a legend. She was the type to march up and measure the height of your grass with a ruler. The type to take photos of your recycling bin to prove you weren't sorting properly. The type to memorize the bylaws like they were scripture and then wield them like weapons. Her house sat diagonally across from mine, and I had long ago accepted that she watched everything from behind those wide bay windows. But that day, she wasn't hidden. She was standing right across the street. At first, I thought maybe she was waiting for a package or talking on the phone. Her stance was stiff, her eyes locked on my driveway in a way that made me feel like she'd been standing there long before I opened the garage. And the second my car came into view, the second those headlights and familiar fender were exposed, she changed. Her eyes flared wide, her mouth dropped open, and what erupted out of her made me wonder if I had stepped into some alternate reality. "That's my car," she shrieked, pointing a rigid finger straight into my garage. I froze. For a second, I thought she was joking. How could she possibly believe that? But her face wasn't playful. It was rage twisted with indignation, a kind of fury that you can't fake. Before I could even process it, she stormed across the street, sandals slapping against the pavement with each angry stride. "What do you think you're doing with my car?" she demanded, her voice so sharp it made the dog walker stop in his tracks and glance back. I blinked at her, then looked behind me just to make sure I hadn't gone insane. There was my car, parked neatly in the garage, the one I'd owned for years. The little dent on the passenger's side door was still there. The same sticker clung to the back window, faded from years of sun. My key was in my pocket. It was undeniably mine. "What are you talking about?" I asked, still half laughing from confusion. She jabbed her finger again. "Don't play games with me. That's the vehicle I just bought. I saw it in my driveway this morning, and now here it is, tucked away in your garage like you thought no one would notice." Thief! The word hit me like a slap. Thief! In my own driveway, with my own car, in front of my own house. I stared at her in disbelief, waiting for her to crack a smile and admit she was exaggerating. But no, her cheeks flushed red, her breathing quickened, and she looked like she might combust on the spot. "Karen," I said slowly, trying to ground her in reality, "this is my car. I've had it for years. I can show you the registration, the insurance papers." "Lies," she cut me off, her voice cracking with intensity. "Don't you dare try to manipulate me. I know exactly what I bought. You think you can gaslight me into believing otherwise? Not today. Not with me." My neighbors were starting to gather now, curtains pulled back, doors opened, voices murmured as people tried to piece together the scene. A couple stood on their lawn across the street, arms folded, whispering like they were front-row spectators at a play. The kids on their bikes had stopped altogether, staring wide-eyed, as if this was the most entertaining drama they'd ever seen. I could feel my pulse racing, not from guilt, but from sheer humiliation. I hadn't done anything wrong, and yet here I was, center stage, being accused of grand theft auto by the loudest woman in the neighborhood. And then came the moment that tipped this entire ordeal into nightmare territory. She yanked her phone from her pocket and held it up like a weapon. "You're going to regret this," she spat. "I'm calling the police." The pit in my stomach opened wide as I heard her punching numbers into the screen. My voice shot up desperate. "Karen, stop this. This is insane. That's my car. You're making a fool of yourself." But she had already lifted the phone to her ear, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Yes, hello?" she said, her voice shifting into an oddly calm tone. "I need to report a crime. My car was stolen." "Yes, I found it. The thief is here right now. He's hiding it in his garage." "Yes, I'm looking right at him." Every word hit me like a hammer. She was fabricating an entire story, spinning fiction into fact for the dispatcher on the other end. I could faintly hear the voice replying, asking her for details, and Karen gave them readily. She described my car, my house, me. She was painting me as a criminal, and there was nothing I could do to stop her. "Red-handed," she said into the phone. "I caught him red-handed." I wanted to scream. "Red-handed? How could you be red-handed for something you owned?" I tried to interject, raising my voice loud enough that maybe, just maybe, the dispatcher could hear me through the receiver. "This is my car." "She's lying." "This is my property, registered to me." But Karen turned her back on me, pressing a finger into her free ear to block me out. To anyone watching, she looked like a brave citizen reporting a serious crime. To me, she looked like someone who had just detonated a bomb in my life. When she finally lowered the phone, she looked at me with a smug smirk that made my blood boil. "They're on their way," she said confidently. "You're done. You'll be in handcuffs before the hour is over." The spectators around us whispered louder now. Some of them looked at me with pity, others with suspicion. That's the danger of an accusation. It plants doubt, even when there's no truth behind it. Suddenly, I wasn't just the guy with the garage door open. I was the guy accused of stealing a car. I felt trapped, caught in a ridiculous nightmare. My own property had become the centerpiece of someone else's delusion, and worse, she had dragged the law into it. The sound of distant sirens began to echo faintly, and my chest tightened. This wasn't going to end with words. This was going to end with flashing lights, uniforms, and questions I shouldn't have to answer. And as Karen stood there, arms folded like she had just saved the neighborhood from a criminal, I realized this was only the beginning. The sound of sirens in the distance was faint at first, but when you know they're coming for you, it doesn't matter how quiet they are. Every wail echoed in my chest. Every passing second tightened the knot in my stomach. I hadn't stolen anything, hadn't broken a single law, yet I was standing in my own driveway like a criminal waiting to be hauled away. And there she was, Karen, standing tall and self-satisfied, her arms crossed and her chin lifted, as if she had orchestrated the greatest takedown in neighborhood history. The murmurs of the neighbors around us swelled as the sirens drew closer. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, curious, whispering theories. Some probably knew Karen's history of exaggerations and meddling. Others, though, looked convinced that something scandalous was unfolding right in front of their houses. That's the danger of a bold accusation. It doesn't just put you on trial with the authorities. It puts you on trial with your entire community. Then the moment came. The patrol car turned onto our street, the red and blue lights bouncing off windows and reflecting in the chrome of parked cars. It slowed to a stop in front of my driveway, and I felt every nerve in my body tighten. The neighbors leaned closer, craning their necks for a better view. To them, this was entertainment. To me, it was a nightmare unfolding in real time. The officer stepped out of the car, one hand resting on his utility belt, eyes scanning the scene. He looked calm, professional, but there was no mistaking the seriousness in his stride as he approached. Karen immediately rushed forward, waving her arms as if she had just captured a fugitive. "Officer, thank goodness you're here," she exclaimed, pointing at me with such conviction that I could feel the weight of her finger like an arrow. That man stole my car. I caught him in the act. Look, it's right there, hidden in his garage. The officer's eyes flicked to me, then to the car parked neatly inside. He didn't draw his weapon, but his hand didn't stray far from it either. He walked closer, stopping at the edge of my driveway. "Sir," he said evenly, "I'm going to need you to step away from the vehicle." My heart hammered against my ribs. The urge to shout, to lash out at the absurdity of it all, boiled inside me. But I knew better. The last thing I wanted was to escalate this into something even more dangerous. I raised my hand slightly, palms open, and tried to keep my voice steady. "Officer, this is my car. I can prove it. I have the title, registration, insurance. All of it is in my name. I've owned this vehicle for years." Before I could continue, Karen cut in, her voice trembling with theatrical outrage. "Don't listen to him. That's exactly what a thief would say. He's lying. He took my car this morning, and I tracked it here. Look at him. He's guilty. I want him arrested." The officer held up a hand to silence her. He looked back at me, his expression unreadable. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership readily available?" "Yes," I said quickly, relief flooding me that there was at least a chance for sanity. "Inside the house. I can get my paperwork right now." Karen gasped like I had just confessed to a crime. "You can't let him go inside, officer. He'll destroy the evidence, or run, or who knows what else. Please, restrain him before he tries anything." The neighbors' whispers grew louder, and I could see some of them pulling out their phones, recording. My humiliation deepened. I wasn't just fighting for my innocence with the police. I was fighting for it in front of an audience that would dissect every gesture, every word, every expression. The officer remained calm, though his eyes stayed sharp on me. "Sir, do you give me permission to accompany you inside to retrieve the documents?" "Yes," I said firmly. "Please. I want to clear this up as quickly as possible." But Karen wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice rising to a shriek. "Don't you see what he's doing? He's manipulating you. He's dangerous. I know my own car, and that is mine. Arrest him before it's too late." The officer turned to her with a stern look. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and let me handle this." For the first time, Karen hesitated, but her glare at me was venomous. She wasn't backing down, not even for a second. The officer gestured for me to lead the way. I walked toward the door of my house, my hand still slightly raised to show I wasn't a threat. My mind raced. I knew I had all the paperwork I needed, but would it be enough? Would logic and proof outweigh the performance Karen was putting on? As we stepped inside, the cool air of the house hit me, but it did nothing to calm the fire in my chest. I led the officer to a drawer in the kitchen where I kept all my important documents. My hands shook slightly as I pulled out the folder, flipping it open to reveal the registration, title, and insurance card. "Here," I said, handing them over. "Everything is in my name. Look at the VIN. It matches the car in the garage." The officer examined the documents carefully. His expression softened just slightly as he compared the numbers. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe this nightmare would actually end here. But then Karen's voice rang out from the driveway, shrill and insistent. She had followed us to the doorway, her arms flailing as she shouted, "Don't believe his fake papers. He probably forged them. Criminals do that kind of thing all the time. He's trying to trick you." The officer sighed, clearly annoyed now, and stepped back outside with the documents in hand. I followed, wanting this spectacle over with. He walked straight to the car in my garage, leaned down, and carefully checked the VIN etched into the dashboard. Then he compared it with the paperwork. "It's a match," he said finally. His tone was matter-of-fact final. "This vehicle is registered to him." Relief surged through me so strongly I nearly staggered. But before I could celebrate, Karen exploded. "No," she shrieked, her voice breaking with desperation. "That's impossible. He must have done something. I know what I bought. I know it. You can't just let him get away with this." The officer's patience had clearly worn thin. "Ma'am, I verified the documents. This car belongs to him. There's no theft here." But Karen wasn't listening. She was too far gone, trapped in her own narrative. Tears welled in her eyes as she screamed, "You're all against me. You're letting a criminal get away right in front of you. This is corruption. That's what this is." The neighbors were recording everything now, some openly laughing at her meltdown, others shaking their heads in disbelief. What had started as humiliation for me was rapidly turning into humiliation for her. And yet, instead of backing down, she doubled down. She lunged toward the garage, as if sheer force could reclaim what she thought was hers. The officer immediately stepped in, blocking her path. "Ma'am, you need to step back," he warned firmly. Karen froze, breathing hard, her hands trembling. She looked around at the watching crowd, at the phones capturing every second, and I could see the realization dawning on her. This wasn't going the way she had imagined. She hadn't uncovered a grand theft, hadn't saved the neighborhood from a criminal. She had made herself into the spectacle, the villain in her own story. But instead of apologizing, instead of walking away with whatever dignity she had left, she spat one last venomous line at me. "This isn't over. You'll pay for this. I'll make sure everyone knows what you did." The officer shook his head and turned to me. "You're clear." "I'm sorry for the trouble, sir. Unfortunately, we do get calls like this sometimes." I nodded, still trembling with adrenaline. "Thank you, officer. Really. I can't believe this happened." He handed my documents back and gave Karen a look sharp enough to cut glass. "Ma'am, if you continue making false reports, there will be consequences." Do I make myself clear? For the first time, Karen said nothing. She just stood there, her face burning, her eyes darting from me to the officer to the neighbors still recording. And then, without another word, she turned and stormed back across the street, slamming her door shut behind her. The officer left soon after, but the damage lingered. The neighbors continued whispering. The videos would undoubtedly spread, and my heart still pounded from the chaos. I had cleared my name, yes, but the memory of Karen's accusation burned in me. Because even though this battle was over, I knew this war with her, the war she had started, was only just beginning. The police car rolled away, its flashing lights shrinking until they disappeared at the end of the street. For most people, that would have been the end of it. The officer had checked the paperwork, confirmed the car was mine, and left with the clear conclusion that no crime had been committed. Most people, after facing such public humiliation, would have retreated into their house, pulled the blinds, and spent the evening licking their wounds in silence. But this was Karen. Karen didn't retreat. She regrouped. I stood in my driveway for a long moment, documents still clutched in my hand, trying to slow the thunder in my chest. My neighbors were dispersing now, though not quietly. Pockets of people lingered on porches, voices rising and falling with speculation and laughter. Some offered sympathetic looks, others smirked at the absurdity of what had just happened. A few even gave me subtle nods of support, but no one dared approach me directly, not with Karen's windows looming across the street like watchtowers. I glanced toward her house. The curtains twitched. She was watching me. I could feel it. Even with her door slammed shut, even with her pride bruised and her story shredded, she wasn't done. In her mind, she hadn't lost the battle, she had simply been delayed. I tried to shake it off. I told myself that reason had won, that the truth had been proven, and that Karen would finally be forced to leave me alone. But deep down, a cold unease lingered. People like Karen don't accept defeat. They reinvent it into another angle, another excuse, another war to wage. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the neighborhood glowed orange under the fading light, I was reminded of that fact. I stepped outside to take the trash bins to the curb. The air was cool, the street quiet. But as I reached the end of the driveway, I spotted movement across the way. Karen stood at the edge of her lawn, phone in hand, staring directly at me. She wasn't yelling this time. She wasn't gesturing wildly. She just stood there, recording. Seriously? I muttered under my breath. I tried to ignore it, dragging the bins into position, but the phone tracked me with every step. "Smile for the camera, thief," she called out finally, her voice carrying across the street like a knife. I froze, anger bubbling in my chest. "Karen, the police cleared me. You know this is my car. You need to stop." She laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Oh, I'm not stopping. You can trick the police with your forged papers, but you can't trick me. And when I get the proof I need, you'll wish you'd never moved here." Her words echoed in my ears long after I'd gone back inside. Proof. She was hunting for proof. Proof of what? That I was some kind of neighborhood menace? That I was a criminal mastermind running a car theft operation out of my garage? The absurdity would have been funny if it wasn't so dangerous. Over the next few days, the atmosphere shifted. I noticed her more often, lurking near her window with binoculars, pacing the sidewalk with her phone raised like she was gathering evidence. Sometimes I'd catch her snapping photos of my driveway. Other times she'd crouch near my mailbox as if she were inspecting it for clues. The neighbors noticed too. I overheard whispers at the mailbox, saw the amused smirks of people who thought it was all ridiculous. But none of them were on the receiving end of it. None of them knew the weight of being stalked by someone with no boundaries and a vendetta. It didn't take long for the escalation to hit a new level. On the third day after the police incident, I came home from work to find a letter taped to my front door. At first, I thought it was some generic HOA notice, maybe about lawn care or street parking. But as I peeled it free, the truth sank in. The letter wasn't from the HOA. It was from Karen. The paper was typed, but the tone was unmistakably hers. To the resident at my address, you are hereby notified that your continued possession of the stolen vehicle in your garage constitutes a violation of both neighborhood trust and HOA regulations regarding criminal activity. If the vehicle is not returned to its rightful owner within 48 hours, I will escalate this matter to the HOA board, local news outlets, and additional law enforcement agencies. Consider this your final warning before further consequences. Sincerely, Karen, her last name. I stared at the page, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. She was doubling down, putting her delusion into writing, threatening me with consequences for owning my own property. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the laughter stuck in my throat. This wasn't just some harmless rant shouted across the street. This was a paper trail, a manufactured record she could wave around to anyone willing to listen. I crumpled the letter and tossed it into the trash, but my nerves buzzed all night. Sleep came in shallow bursts, each one interrupted by flashes of headlights across my window by the phantom sound of a phone camera clicking. The next morning, I woke to a fresh nightmare. My car, the same car Karen claimed as hers, was covered in sticky notes. Dozens of them plastered across the windshield, the hood, the doors. Each one bore the same single word written in thick black marker. Thief. My stomach dropped. I ripped the notes off one by one, my anger boiling hotter with each crumpled wad of paper. Neighbors slowed their morning walks to watch, their eyes wide, their phones raised again. Some chuckled. Others looked genuinely sympathetic, but all of them saw. And there she was, across the street, standing with her arms folded and a smirk plastered across her face. She didn't need to admit it. I knew she had done it. "This is harassment, Karen," I shouted across the street. "You've gone too far." She shrugged, feigning innocence. "Just telling the truth. People deserve to know who they're living next to." Every bone in my body wanted to march across the street and confront her face to put an end to this circus once and for all. But I knew better. That's what she wanted. She wanted me to lash out, to lose control, to give her the excuse she needed to paint me as the villain. So I clenched my fists, swallowed the anger, and peeled the last sticky note from the windshield. But inside, the fire burned hotter. She wasn't going to stop. She wasn't capable of stopping. Later that day, I reached out to the HOA board myself. I figured if she was threatening to drag them into it, I might as well get ahead of her lies. I explained the situation, laid out the facts, even offered to bring my documents to prove ownership. The board members listened politely, but I could tell from their tones they were hesitant. Karen wasn't just any resident. She was loud, persistent, and deeply entwined in their meetings. People like that had influence, not because they were right, but because they were relentless. "We'll review the matter," one of them said finally, "and get back to you." That phrase chilled me. Review the matter. As if there was any matter to review. As if her baseless accusations carried equal weight to my proof of ownership. By evening, I realized the trap I was in. It wasn't about logic, paperwork, or police reports. It was about noise. Karen was loud, and in a neighborhood like ours, loud voices carried. They shaped perception, twisted narratives, and planted seeds of doubt. And Karen knew it. That night, I caught her on the sidewalk again, this time with a clipboard in hand. She was going door to door, talking to neighbors, gesturing toward my house, scribbling notes. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew what she was doing. She was gathering signatures, building a case, rallying the court of public opinion against me. The longer I watched, the more the realization sank in. The police clearing me hadn't ended the battle. It had just moved it to another arena. And Karen was just getting started. When Karen started going door to door with that clipboard, I should have known the neighborhood was about to turn into a stage for her crusade. I watched from my window as she marched with purpose, stopping at each porch like a politician campaigning for votes. She gestured wildly, her voice carrying even when I couldn't make out the exact words. And one by one, people nodded, hesitated, or reluctantly scribbled something down on her sheet. She was gathering signatures, building what she thought was a case, turning what should have been a quiet street into her personal courtroom. At first, I tried to brush it off. Rationally, I knew she couldn't actually take my car, couldn't undo the police officer's ruling, couldn't bend reality to match her delusions. But rationality doesn't win when someone like Karen is involved. Perception wins. Noise wins. And Karen was noise incarnate. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the image of her smug face lit by porch lights as neighbor after neighbor scribbled their names onto her sheet. My mind spun with possibilities. Was she convincing them I was a criminal? Was she claiming I forged the car title? Was she saying I was some kind of scammer? The worst part was that I couldn't stop her. She had free rein to tell her version of events, no matter how twisted, while I was left to sit and wonder how much damage she was doing behind closed doors. The next day, the fallout began. I went to grab the mail in the morning, only to find a neighbor across the street, a man I'd spoken to casually before about lawn care, avoiding my eyes. He rushed back into his house, practically slamming the door behind him. Later, while I was sweeping my driveway, another neighbor who usually waved gave me only a stiff nod before disappearing inside. The shift was subtle but undeniable. Karen was winning hearts, or at least sowing enough doubt that people weren't sure what to believe anymore. By the weekend, the first official shot was fired. A letter arrived, stamped with the HOA's logo. My stomach twisted before I even opened it. Inside was a typed notice. Dear resident, it has been brought to our attention that there is a dispute regarding the ownership and presence of a vehicle located at your property. In order to ensure the integrity and safety of our community, the whole board requests that you attend a special hearing on this matter scheduled for a date. Failure to attend may result in further action under the HOA's bylaws. Sincerely, the Board of Directors. I felt the blood drain from my face. A hearing. They were actually entertaining her nonsense. Despite the police clearing me, despite my documents, despite the obvious truth, the HOA had allowed Karen's accusations to carry enough weight to drag me into a formal process. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the letter in front of me, the weight of it pressing down harder than it should have. I knew it was baseless, but I also knew how these hearings worked. They weren't about facts. They were about appearances, about appeasing the loudest voices, about keeping harmony in the community. Karen was loud. I was just one man. I gathered every document I had, car title, insurance, registration, even receipts. I put them into a neat folder, rehearsed what I'd say, and told myself it would all be fine. But deep down, I knew Karen wouldn't make it that easy. When the day of the hearing came, I walked into the HOA's community hall with a knot in my stomach. The room was modest, lined with folding chairs, a long table at the front where the board members sat, and a handful of neighbors scattered about. Some were curious, others clearly there to support Karen. She sat near the front, clipboard in hand, wearing a smug smile that made my skin crawl. The chairperson called the meeting to order, outlining the dispute in careful, neutral language. Then, to my disbelief, Karen was invited to speak first. She rose with theatrical flair, as though she'd been preparing for this performance her whole life. "Thank you, board members," she began, her voice dripping with self-importance. "I am here today because I believe in protecting our neighborhood from criminal activity. 3 weeks ago, this man," she jabbed a finger in my direction, "was seen taking possession of a vehicle that did not belong to him. I acted in good faith and contacted law enforcement, but as we all know, sometimes the police make mistakes. Sometimes criminals hide behind forged documents and technicalities. I am here to stand up for the truth." She flipped through her clipboard dramatically, holding up photos she'd taken of me near my car, of me pulling into my driveway, of the police cruiser parked out front that day. She waved them like they were evidence in a trial. "This is not just about one car," she continued. "This is about the integrity of our community. If we allow someone to get away with theft, what message does that send? If we ignore red flags, what danger are we inviting into our neighborhood?" Murmurs rippled through the audience. I could see the board members shifting uncomfortably, glancing at one another. Karen was winning them over with her performance, weaving paranoia into patriotism, dressing her obsession up as civic duty. Finally, it was my turn. I stood, folder in hand, and forced my voice to stay steady. I laid out the facts. The car was mine. I had the title, registration, and insurance all in my name. I explained that the police had already reviewed everything and cleared me on the spot. I held up each document, offered copies to the board, did everything short of slamming them onto the table. "This is harassment," I said firmly. "Karen has been stalking me, recording me, plastering my car with notes, calling me a thief. She's turned this into a circus because she can't admit she was wrong. And now she's wasting everyone's time and damaging the community she claims to protect." There was silence when I finished. A long, heavy silence. Then the chairperson cleared his throat. "Thank you both," he said carefully. "The board will deliberate on this matter and issue a decision." Karen sat down, smirking as if she'd already won. The board's decision came a week later in another letter. They hadn't ruled against me, not officially, but they hadn't dismissed the matter either. Instead, they issued a warning that the dispute had caused unrest in the community and urged me to work toward resolution with my neighbor in order to restore harmony. A warning. For what? For existing? For being targeted? I crumpled the letter in my hand, rage coursing through me. Karen had managed to twist the system, to drag me through humiliation and paperwork, and still I was the one coming out with a warning. She wasn't just winning battles, she was rewriting the rules of the war. And sure enough, she used it as fuel. She began parading the letter around like it was proof she'd been right all along. I saw her showing it to neighbors, heard her loudly explaining that the board had acknowledged the problem. She left copies in people's mailboxes. She even pinned one to the community bulletin board near the mail center. Everywhere I went, I felt the shift in the air. Neighbors whispered when I walked by. Some gave me wary looks, others openly avoided me. Karen's campaign had taken root. Facts didn't matter anymore. Her narrative had won. But I wasn't about to roll over. I started documenting everything. Every sticky note, every recording, every photo I caught her taking. I saved copies of my own documents, started logging the dates and times of her harassment, even spoke with an attorney about potential legal action. If Karen wanted a war of paper trails, I would build one of my own. Still, no matter how much I prepared, I couldn't escape the feeling of being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I scanned for her. Every time I pulled into the driveway, I checked the windows across the street. Karen was always there, lurking like a shadow with a smile. And then came the night I realized just how far she was willing to go. It was nearly midnight when I heard the sound. A faint metallic scrape outside my window. I froze, listening. Another scrape, closer this time. I crept to the blinds and peeked out. There she was. Karen. On my property. Standing by my car with something in her hand. A wire hanger, maybe, or a slim gym. She was trying to break into my car. My pulse spiked. I grabbed my phone, hit record, and filmed her in the act. Her face was illuminated by the faint glow of a street lamp, twisted in concentration, as she jiggled the tool against my car door. For a moment, I considered storming outside, confronting her, screaming until the whole neighborhood woke up. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, recording every second, until she finally gave up and scurried back across the street like a rat caught in the open. When I replayed the video, my hands shaking, I knew this was it. She had crossed the line from harassment into outright crime. And this time, I had the proof. The war wasn't over. It was only escalating. I didn't sleep much that night after catching Karen in the act. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed the scene in my head. Her hunched posture, the faint glint of metal in her hand, the way she scurried back across the street when she realized it wasn't working. It wasn't just paranoia anymore. It wasn't just harassment. It was attempted theft, and I had it on video. The next morning, I went through the footage again, making sure every detail was visible. The timestamp in the corner of my phone, the street lamp casting its glow across the driveway, her unmistakable face framed in the act. I trimmed nothing, left nothing open to interpretation. This was as clear as it got. By noon, I was at the police station. I walked in with the kind of determined energy that only comes when frustration has hardened into resolve. I handed the officer at the desk my phone and folder, explained everything, and waited while they watched the clip. The officer's expression shifted as the seconds passed, from mild boredom to a raised eyebrow, and then finally to the kind of frown that meant this wasn't something they could brush aside. "That's your neighbor?" he asked. "Yes," I said firmly. "She's been harassing me for weeks. She called you once already claiming I stole my own car. The hoe held a hearing about it. Now she's on video trying to break into the car she says is hers." The officer leaned back, exhaling slowly. "All right, that's enough to open a case. We'll file this as attempted theft and trespassing. Do you want to press charges?" The words hit me with a mix of relief and hesitation. Part of me wanted to scream yes, to see her finally face real consequences for everything she'd put me through. But another part of me knew pressing charges would only escalate her obsession further. She was already relentless. What would she become if she thought I was attacking her through the law? "Yes," I said finally. My voice didn't waver. "I want to press charges." They took my statement, copied the video, and assured me they'd follow up. When I left the station, I felt lighter, like for the first time the balance had shifted in my favor. This wasn't just my word against hers anymore. I had evidence, and the law was on my side. Or so I thought. By the time I got home, Karen already knew. I don't know how she found out so quickly. Maybe she saw me leaving the station. Maybe someone on the force tipped her off. But she was waiting on her porch when I pulled into the driveway. "You think you're clever, don't you?" she shouted, her voice shrill and cracked with rage. "Trying to set me up? Trying to make me look like the criminal?" I ignored her, clutching my folder tighter. But she wasn't done. "You're the thief. Everyone knows it. You can stage whatever videos you want, but the truth will come out. It always does." I went inside, locked the door, and forced myself not to react. She wanted me to bite, to scream back, to give her another scene for the neighborhood to witness. Not this time. That evening, I stepped out to grab something from the garage, only to find another letter taped to my door. My stomach sank as I peeled it off. This one was shorter, but just as unhinged. "You can run to the police all you want, but you can't hide what you've done. I see everything. I know everything. And soon, everyone else will too. Enjoy your car while you can, because the truth will catch up with you." Karen. The words made my skin crawl. They weren't just accusations anymore. They were threats. I called the police again, reported the note, and added it to my growing pile of evidence. The officer on the phone assured me they'd make contact with her soon. But I knew that phrase. It meant they'd knock on her door, give her a stern talking to, and leave. It wasn't going to stop her. Not now. The days that followed were a blur of tension. Karen doubled down on her campaign, telling anyone who would listen that I was framing her, that I was a manipulator, that I had doctored the video. Some neighbors believed her, some didn't, but all of them watched me differently. I could feel the judgment in their eyes, the way conversations fell quiet when I walked by. Then the HOA got involved again. Another letter arrived, this one summoning me to a second hearing, this time not just about the car, but about ongoing disputes and disturbances impacting community peace. I almost laughed when I read it. I was the one being harassed, stalked, and slandered, yet somehow I was being hauled in front of the board again like I was the problem. On the day of the hearing, I walked into the hall with my folder thicker than before. I had the video, the note, the police report, everything neatly organized. Karen was already there, pacing like a predator in a cage, her eyes burning holes into me the second I entered. The chairperson opened the meeting with a sigh, already weary of the drama. "We've received multiple complaints regarding this ongoing conflict," he said. "It is our goal to resolve this matter in the best interest of the community." Karen sprang to her feet before he could even finish. "He's trying to destroy me," she shrieked, pointing at me with trembling hands. "He's framing me with fake videos, planting things to make me look guilty. I caught him stealing, and now he's turning everyone against me." Her performance was unhinged, more frantic than before, but still loud enough to fill the room. Some neighbors nodded along, others exchanged uneasy glances. When it was my turn, I didn't waste words. I pulled out my phone, connected it to the screen, and played the video. The room fell silent. There was Karen, plain as day, under the street lamp, fumbling with my car door. Her face was unmistakable, her posture undeniable, and when she scurried away, the timestamp glared in the corner, proof it wasn't some ancient clip. When the video ended, I looked up at the board. "That's your proof," I said simply. "This is harassment. This is trespassing. And I have already pressed charges." For the first time, Karen's mask cracked. Her face flushed, her eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. But the murmurs this time weren't supportive. They were sharp, judgmental, laced with disgust. The board members whispered among themselves, their expressions darkening. Karen tried to recover. "It's fake. He staged it. He edited it." But her voice cracked with desperation, and no one seemed to believe her anymore. The chairperson finally raised a hand. "Enough, the evidence is clear. This behavior is unacceptable. We cannot allow this to continue." For the first time in weeks, I felt the tide shift. The board didn't issue me another warning. Instead, they announced they would be filing a formal complaint against Karen for violating community rules, for harassment, and for endangering the peace of the neighborhood. Karen exploded. She shouted, cursed, accused the board of corruption, of conspiring with me, of being blind to the truth. Security had to escort her out of the hall as her shrill voice echoed down the corridor. When I walked out afterward, neighbors looked at me differently. Some clapped me on the shoulder, muttering words of support. Others simply nodded, their skepticism replaced with quiet acknowledgement. For the first time, it felt like the truth was winning. But even as I drove home, relief washing over me, I couldn't shake the thought that Karen wasn't finished. People like her don't stop because of shame or evidence. They twist every defeat into another excuse for war. And sure enough, that night, as I pulled into my driveway, I saw her standing in her window, staring out with a look I'll never forget. It wasn't rage this time. It wasn't even humiliation. It was something colder, something calculated. The war wasn't over. It was only evolving. After the second HOA hearing, after Karen was dragged out of the hall screaming about conspiracies and corruption, I thought maybe, just maybe, the nightmare was nearing its end. The board had finally seen the truth. Neighbors had finally witnessed her exposed in front of everyone. For a brief moment, there was silence on the street. Her porch lights stayed off, her blinds drawn. For 2 whole days, I didn't see her pacing with her phone or scribbling on her clipboard. It was the quietest 48 hours I'd had since this madness began. And that should have been my warning. Because Karen wasn't retreating. She was regrouping. The first sign came in the form of an envelope. Not taped to my door this time, but delivered by mail, stamped with the logo of a local news station. Inside was a letter, brief and blunt. Mr. My last name, We have received multiple tips regarding allegations of vehicle theft and HOA disputes in your neighborhood. We are conducting an investigation into these claims and would like the opportunity to interview you for your side of the story. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Sincerely, reporter's name. I sat at the table staring at the letter, my jaw clenched. Karen had gone to the media. She hadn't just stirred up neighbors or the HOA or the police. She was trying to broadcast her delusions to the entire city. I didn't respond to the letter. I figured no response was safer than risking my words being twisted on camera. But ignoring it didn't stop the storm. 2 days later, a news van rolled down our street, parked across from my house, and out stepped a reporter and a cameraman. And guess who was waiting for them? Karen. She marched out of her front door like she was stepping onto a stage, clutching her infamous clipboard like it was scripture. She led them to the sidewalk, gesturing wildly toward my house, her voice carrying as she spun her story again, how I'd stolen her car, how the HOA was covering it up, how she was the lone defender of justice in a neighborhood gone blind. From my window, I watched the camera pan toward my garage, zoom in on my driveway, capture shots of me standing stiffly behind the curtains. It felt invasive, humiliating, surreal. The reporter knocked on my door a few minutes later. "We'd like to get your side," she said politely, microphone in hand, camera aimed at my face. "No comment," I said flatly. "This is harassment." "She's lying." That was all I gave them. I shut the door before Karen could rush over and insert herself into the moment. But it didn't matter. That night, the story aired. Local HOA dispute escalates into car theft allegations, the anchor announced. Karen's face filled the screen, her voice trembling with fake emotion as she told the world how her car had been stolen by the men across the street. My house was blurred in the background, my silhouette faintly visible in one of the shots. The clip ended with a voiceover. The accused resident declined to comment. Declined to comment. 3 words that made me sound guilty by default. The fallout was immediate. Strangers began driving slowly down our street, gawking at my house. Online forums lit up with speculation, with half the commenters calling Karen a liar and the other half calling me a thief. Someone even posted my address on social media, and suddenly the harassment wasn't just coming from across the street, it was coming from faceless names behind keyboards, accusing me of being everything from a scam artist to part of a stolen car ring. The pit in my stomach grew heavier by the day. Karen had managed to pull me into the spotlight, to paint me as the villain on a public stage far bigger than our neighborhood. And she wasn't finished. Within a week, flyers started appearing. On lampposts, on community boards, even slipped under people's doors. They all carried the same message, typed in bold block letters. "Beware, car thief in our neighborhood." And beneath it, a grainy photo of me standing by my car. Neighbors tore them down, but more kept popping up. The HOA sent out an email condemning unauthorized postings, but Karen twisted even that, telling anyone who'd listen that it was further proof of a cover-up. I felt cornered, trapped in my own home. Every time I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Every time I got in my car, I expected someone to confront me, to accuse me. And then, as if the chaos wasn't enough, the police came back. Not to arrest me, thank God, but to follow up on the charges I'd filed. They'd reviewed the video again, and now they had enough to officially cite Karen for attempted theft and trespassing. The officers went to her house, knocked on her door, and served her papers. I watched from my window as she erupted. She screamed at them, called them corrupt, accused them of being part of my operation. She waved her clipboard like it was a shield, jabbed her finger toward my house, and swore she'd expose the truth. The officers remained calm, handed her the documents, and left. For a brief moment, I thought justice was finally catching up. But Karen twisted even that into fuel. The next morning, another letter appeared in my mailbox, this one written in her frantic handwriting, not typed. "You think you've won? You think some piece of paper scares me? You can't silence the truth. You can't hide forever. This isn't over." Karen. Her defiance was terrifying in its certainty. She didn't see the legal charges as a defeat. She saw them as validation of her own persecution, proof that her fight was righteous. That weekend, she escalated again. It was early Saturday morning when the noise jolted me awake. A crowd had gathered in the cul-de-sac, dozens of people, some from the neighborhood, others I didn't recognize. At the center of it all was Karen, standing on a makeshift podium she'd dragged from her garage, holding a megaphone. She was hosting a rally. Neighbors, friends, truth seekers. Her voice boomed through the speaker. We are under attack. Criminals are hiding in plain sight, protected by corrupt boards and blind police. But we will not be silenced. The crowd cheered. She held up posters with my face on them, with captions like "Thief Among Us" and "Protect Our Neighborhood." She handed out flyers, shook hands, riled people up with her fiery words. It wasn't just delusion anymore. It was a movement. I stood at my window, heart pounding, watching strangers chant outside my house. My phone buzzed with messages from coworkers who'd seen the story online, from relatives asking if it was true, from friends telling me to stay safe. My private nightmare had become a public circus. The HOA called an emergency meeting that night. For the first time, they didn't just scold me. They scolded Karen. They announced fines for unauthorized gatherings, for distributing defamatory material, for disrupting community peace. They even threatened to suspend her voting rights on the board if it continued. But Karen didn't care. She paid no fine, ignored every warning, and doubled down again. By now, the stress was eating me alive. I could barely sleep, barely eat, jumping at every sound outside. I started parking my car in a friend's garage just to keep it out of sight, to stop it from being the center of her obsession. But the absence only fueled her claims. He hid the car, she shouted one night, standing in the middle of the street with her megaphone. He knows he's guilty, and now he's trying to cover it up. That's when I realized there was no winning with her. Every truth I showed, every piece of evidence I proved, every lie I disproved, it all became part of her twisted story. And worse, she was starting to drag people beyond the neighborhood into her crusade. Not just the news, not just strangers online, but advocacy groups, watchdog organizations, anyone gullible enough to believe her spin. It was no longer a neighborhood drama. It was becoming a siege. The siege wasn't loud every minute of every day, but it was constant in its presence. Even when Karen wasn't outside with her megaphone, even when the news vans weren't circling the block, the pressure was still there, seeping through the cracks, lingering in the silence like smoke after a fire. I'd walk past my own front window and feel exposed, like a sniper's scope might be following me from across the street. I'd pull into the driveway and check 3 times before stepping out of the car, scanning for a camera lens, for Karen's glare, for another ambush. Home didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like enemy territory. The real breaking point began when Karen discovered social media live streaming. Before, she had been limited to flyers, rallies, local gossip. Now she had a global audience at her fingertips. Every morning at 9 a.m. sharp, she'd drag a folding chair out to the sidewalk, set up her phone on a tripod, and start broadcasting. Day 1 of my vigil, she called it, as though she was staging a noble protest rather than harassing her neighbor. She'd talk for hours, rambling about corruption, betrayal, crime, and always circling back to me, the so-called car thief. People from other states began tuning in, sending her messages of support, asking for updates, even donating to her cause. The money changed her. She went from being the neighborhood nuisance to believing she was some kind of whistleblower, a crusader with a following. She wore the donations like armor, bragging about how the people believed her, how she had an army behind her now. She started ordering custom shirts, banners, even a flag with slogans like "Justice for Karen" and "Stop the Car Thief." Every time I stepped outside, I could see that flag flapping in her front yard, bold and bright, a reminder that her obsession wasn't going away, it was growing. I tried to fight back in the only ways I could. I filed complaints with the HOA. I filed restraining orders. I even spoke to a lawyer about suing for defamation. But Karen knew how to dance on the line without crossing it. She'd claimed she was just asking questions, or that everything she said was her opinion. And when papers were served, she'd hold them up on her live stream, waving them like trophies, declaring that they were proof she was getting close to the truth. The toll wasn't just on me. My family started distancing themselves. Friends stopped visiting. Coworkers avoided bringing up the story, but I could see it in their eyes. They weren't sure if they believed me. After all, why would someone go to such extremes if they didn't have some kind of evidence? That was Karen's genius in her madness. The sheer scale of her obsession made it seem credible to outsiders. Then came the vandalism. It started small, scratches on my mailbox, a cracked taillight on my car. Then one night, someone spray painted the word thief across my garage door. I didn't catch who it was, but I didn't need to. Whether Karen did it herself or one of her followers did it to impress her, the message was clear. The harassment was no longer just noise. It was physical, invasive, dangerous. The police came, took a report, shook their heads, and left. They were sympathetic, but without proof. Their hands were tied. Meanwhile, Karen spun it into another episode of her ongoing show. "Notice how quick he painted over it," she said on her live stream the next day. "Guilty conscience. He's hiding the truth." I stopped sleeping. Nights were the worst, because that's when Karen seemed most unpredictable. Sometimes she'd walk the street, flashlight in hand, narrating into her phone about how she was documenting the evidence. Other times, she'd stand on her porch for hours, staring at my house, her silhouette framed against her floodlight like a specter waiting to strike. Every creak in the night, every passing car, every bark from a dog jolted me awake, convinced she was making her move. And still, she escalated. One evening, I came home to find a group gathered outside my house, strangers holding signs, chanting along with Karen. She'd organized a protest. "We want justice," they shouted. "Return the car." I called the police again, and eventually they dispersed the crowd, but not before dozens of phones had recorded me being escorted into my house by officers. Those videos, clipped out of context, flooded the internet within hours. "Thief hiding from the truth." The captions read, "Police closing in." I realized then that Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was waging a war of perception, and in that arena, she was winning. The hoe finally reached its limit. They called another emergency meeting, this time not to scold, but to take action. The president, who had once rolled his eyes at my complaints, now admitted that Karen's behavior had crossed every possible line. They voted unanimously to fine her thousands of dollars, to suspend her voting rights, and even to pursue legal action for violating community peace. But Karen, standing in the back of the room with her phone live streaming, just smiled. She didn't care about fines or suspensions. She had an audience bigger than the hoe now. As the board announced their decision, she turned her camera on herself and said, "They're trying to silence me. But you all see the truth. They can't stop us." Her defiance was chilling, and her followers ate it up. Donations doubled. Support poured in. People I'd never met showed up in our neighborhood to take selfies with her, to stand in solidarity, to chant her slogans. It wasn't just harassment anymore. It was a cult. The strain broke me. One night, after another round of shouting outside my window, I snapped. I stormed out onto the porch and shouted back, voice cracking from weeks of bottled-up fury. "You're insane. You need help. Leave me alone." Karen, of course, had her phone pointed at me the whole time. The clip went viral. "Unhinged thief lashes out." The captions read, "My moment of raw humanity became her proof, her evidence, her victory." I felt sick. By now, I'd stopped thinking about winning. I just wanted peace. But peace felt impossible with Karen entrenched across the street, feeding off the chaos she created. And then, just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. One morning, I opened my front door to find an envelope on the mat. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "Leave before it's too late." No signature, no explanation. Just a threat. I sat on the floor holding that note, my hands shaking, my chest tight. This wasn't about lies anymore. This was about safety. about survival. Someone out there, maybe Karen, maybe one of her followers, wanted me gone. I reported it, of course. The police took it seriously this time, promising extra patrols. But their presence only fueled Karen's fire. She went live again that night, pointing to the squad car parked at the corner. "Look how scared he is," she sneered. "Calling in favors, wasting taxpayer money, trying to hide under police protection. If he were innocent, why would he need all this?" And her audience nodded, believed, donated. The siege had reached a point of no return. My neighborhood wasn't just hostile anymore, it was a battlefield. And I was standing in the crosshairs of a war I never asked for, a war that seemed to have no end. But I didn't know then that the end was coming. It just wasn't the kind of end I expected. The note telling me to leave before it was too late wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a ticking clock. I carried it around like it was made of fire, every glance at the words burning deeper into my mind. For days, I lived on edge, watching shadows crawl across the street, waiting for the hammer to drop. Every noise outside felt like a warning, every knock at the door a threat. The house I'd worked years to buy had become a bunker. I ate standing at the counter with one ear tilted toward the window, slept in bursts on the couch with the TV on just to drown out the silence, jumped every time my phone buzzed. Karen was quieter in those days, but not because she was backing down. She was calculating. Her live streams became more measured, her voice lower, like she was letting her audience in on a secret. "Big things are happening soon," she whispered into her camera one night. "The truth is about to come out, and they can't stop it. You'll see. Everyone will see." The way she said it made my skin crawl. Then came the night that ended everything. It was around midnight when I heard the first sound, a metallic scrape, faint but deliberate. I froze on the couch, straining to listen. Another scrape, closer this time, like metal against concrete. My gut twisted. Someone was outside my garage. I grabbed my phone and crept to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see. My heart lurched into my throat. Karen was there, flashlight clenched between her teeth, crowbar in hand, prying at the edge of my garage door. And behind her, two men, strangers, faces half hidden under hoodies. This wasn't live streaming. This wasn't shouting from across the street. This was an attack. I dialed 911 with shaking hands, whispering into the phone, "She's trying to break into my garage. She has people with her. Please hurry." As I spoke, Karen yanked the crowbar free and barked something to the men. One of them pulled out a camera, the other a toolkit. My blood went cold as I realized what they were doing. They weren't just breaking in. They were staging something. They wanted to plant evidence. I couldn't wait. I ran to the front door and threw on the floodlights. "Get away from my house," I roared, my voice cracking with adrenaline. Karen spun around, the flashlight beam catching her wild eyes. "Caught you," she screamed, pointing the crowbar at me like a sword. "Everyone watching, you see this? He's panicking. He knows we've found the proof." But she wasn't streaming. There was no audience. Just me, her, and the two men who looked far more interested in finishing their job than playing along with her theatrics. One of them hissed, "Cops are coming. Let's go." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Karen dropped the crowbar and bolted for her house, shrieking nonsense about justice and evidence. The two men took off running down the street, vanishing into the dark. Seconds later, squad car screeched to a stop, red and blue lights flooding the cul-de-sac. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, shouting commands. I raised my hands, shouting. She tried to break in. She brought people with her. They ran that way. The chaos was blinding. Neighbors spilled out onto porches, phones recording, voices shouting. Karen reappeared on her lawn, hair wild, robe flapping, screaming at the top of her lungs. "He's the thief. Arrest him! Arrest him!" But this time, the evidence was clear. The crowbar lay on the driveway. My garage door was dented, scraped from her prying. My security cameras, which I had almost forgotten about, had caught everything: the break-in attempt, the strangers, Karen leading the charge. The officers weren't buying her act anymore. They cuffed her on the spot as she thrashed and wailed, shrieking about conspiracies and cover-ups. The neighbors watched in stunned silence as the woman who had terrorized them for months was finally dragged, kicking and screaming, into the back of a police car. Her arrest should have felt like victory. But standing there under the flashing lights, my hands still trembling, I didn't feel victorious. I felt hollow, exhausted, broken. The next few weeks were a blur of court dates, statements, and cleanup. Karen was charged with attempted burglary, harassment, conspiracy, and a laundry list of HOA violations. The two men she'd brought were eventually caught, drifters she'd met online, lured in with promises of money and fame. They confessed that she'd planned the break-in as a way to prove her car was in my garage. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, though normal didn't mean what it used to. People walked their dogs again. Kids played in the street, but there was an unease in the air, like everyone was waiting for the next explosion. My own house still bore scars, the scratches on the garage door, the faint shadow of spray paint that never fully washed away. Karen, of course, never admitted guilt. In every hearing, she ranted about being framed, about conspiracies reaching from the HOA to the police to the media. Even in handcuffs, she carried herself like a martyr. Her followers online dwindled, some realizing they'd been duped, others moving on to the next spectacle. But a small core stayed loyal, parroting her lines, insisting she was a political prisoner of suburban corruption. I tried to rebuild my life, but it wasn't easy. My reputation had been shredded, my privacy violated, my peace stolen. Coworkers still whispered, families still asked cautious questions, strangers online still left comments under my name. The stain of her lies lingered long after she was gone. One evening, months later, I stood in my driveway at sunset, staring at the house across the street. Karen's windows were dark now, her blinds closed, her flagpole bare. The property sat empty, the grass overgrown, a foreclosure notice taped to the door. She was gone. Finally, truly gone. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd left something behind. Not just the damage, not just the fear, but a warning about how fragile peace really is, about how quickly one person's obsession can unravel an entire community, about how a lie, repeated loud enough and long enough, can feel more real than the truth. I opened my garage door slowly, the sound echoing through the quiet street. For the first time in what felt like forever, no one screamed, no one accused, no one called the police. It was just me, my car, and the fading light of the day. I stood there for a long time, breathing in the silence, letting it wash over me like water on parched ground. And in that silence, I finally understood. Karen hadn't stolen my car. She had stolen my peace, my trust, my sense of safety. But she hadn't destroyed me. I was still standing. I had survived her storm. And that, in the end, was my victory.